Hello out there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our live stream on preparing your permanent residency application for the Canadian Experience class of Express Entry. I'm Dane Stewart, one of the content developers here at Moving to Canada, and I am joined today by Anthony Doherty, a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, co founder of Doherty Fultz Immigration, a consultancy based out of Toronto. Thank you so much for joining me today, Anthony. How are you doing?
I'm good, Dane. Thanks for having me again. I was really looking forward to today. Just like to say to you and all your viewers, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah,
Big for you Irish folks, eh?
yeah, it is. But obviously, well, it's quite a different St. Patrick's Day this year.
Yeah. Well, here's to
But
hoping that 2022 will be like fully back to normal by then. Just a couple things for the folks who are tuning in. Um, First of all, if you're watching this later on YouTube, please be aware that you can use the timestamps right down there in the description to jump ahead to the section that you're most interested in. Second, we will be taking questions live throughout this event. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop your questions right there in the comments section. I am following along. So I can see I see Mercedes just said Happy St. Patrick's Day. Lee is wishing you a Happy St. Patrick's Day. Tiago. So tons of love for the Irish out there today. So I will be following along the comments through the whole live stream. So if you've got questions, drop them right in there and we'll take them a little bit later on. Which brings me to my third point. Please only ask questions about the PR application for the Canadian Experience class of Express Entry, and please ask your questions in the right section. We have a ton of material to get through today. This is a huge topic, and we have to go in depth into a bunch of different areas. So we really will only have the time to get through things that are explicitly about CEC. And to help us streamline that, wait until we're gonna have table of contents. We'll go over in a second, but when we're in a specific subject like required documents, that's when you can ask questions about required documents. If you ask them at another time, unfortunately, the reality is I probably won't be able to keep track of them, so we won't be able to address your question at that time. So I hope that I hope that's clear for everybody. Not too many rules to follow here in this live stream. And Mercedes is asking a great question here. Will this stream be recorded? Yes, Mercedes, it will be. You'll be able to view it later on our Facebook page, just a couple of minutes after the event is done, and we'll also be posting it on our YouTube channel. That's Moving to Canada on YouTube. I think we're about ready to get into it. Just before we do launch into the meat of today's topic, I did want to give a chance just to showcase yourself, Anthony, and the work that you guys do at Doherty Fultz Immigration. Um, I've just pulled a couple of pages from your website here because you guys are being really kind to us and sharing your expertise, just a breadth of knowledge that people most often try to people most often have to pay for this kind of expertise, and you're here to help us out with that today. So I've pulled up
no,
just on your
thanks for no. As I said, we're always happy to do so, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this.
Great. So I've got a web page pulled up here for a PR application that you guys do. This is a really great option, viewers, if you want someone to take a look at your final PR application before you submit it. As we're going to talk about today, you can be rejected or refused for even the tiniest little errors. So this is one of the times when it really does make sense to work with a professional. And so I'll pop a link to that into the comments section, or you can also click the pinned comment, which will take you right to Anthony's website to a page where you can either, book an application review, book a consultation, all of that fun stuff that will really give you the best chances of approval with this CEC application. Great. So, Anthony, how are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm good. Just want to, as well, everyone watching that got an invitation on February the 13th. Congratulations. I won't lie to you, Dane. I'm dying to meet the person, the 75-point person. I would like to give a big congratulations to that person. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that does bring up an important bit of context for today, which is that we've designed this live series. This is the second one that we've done for people who are preparing their CEC applications because of this massive draw that happened on February 13th. 27,000 ITAs were issued, so there's a ton of people who have to have their application ready to go and submitted. I think by May 13th. But bear in mind, the cutoff score for this cohort was only 75 points, which does leave people a little bit more wiggle room when preparing their application. You might not need to have achieved quite the CRS score that you had in your profile. So if you are watching this later on, if you've received an ITA in a different cohort, or if you're not a CEC applicant, if you're coming through FSW or FST, just be aware that things might be a little bit different for you. But we do have tons of resources on our YouTube channel, on our website, and you can always book a consultation with Anthony for some professional guidance. Great. Let's see if we've got. Oh yeah, and I see our editor has popped a link to our YouTube channel right there in the comments section. And we got some great questions coming in, guys. Hold your questions. We're about to get into the meat of it, and just make sure that you ask your question in the appropriate topic. So here's what we're covering today. Topics to cover. We're going to start off by going over the personal information that you have to submit with your CEC application. And then we'll cover a big question we get: what to do if your information changes, or what if you put one thing in your profile and you want to change that thing now that you've gotten an invitation to apply. Then we're going to move on from information to talk about documents. So what are the required documents for a CEC application? And of course, what to do if you can't get a required document, because in some situations, life isn't perfect and you got to work without exactly what's required. Finally, we're going to talk about what Anthony has deemed some of the most common mistakes made by express entry applicants. You submit a lot of express entry PR applications, right, Anthony?
Yes, we submit lots and we review as well. So yeah, we've seen all of the common mistakes, or not so common mistakes. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
we'll be able to cover that.
sometimes just a little bit of research is all it takes to empower yourself to get an approval there. We're also going to discuss just the special COVID-19 immigration measures that are in place right now. They're a useful thing to just bear in mind. They change all the time, but they are affecting express entry and travel to Canada. So we'll do a quick overview there. And then we're going to end things off talking about you, Anthony, and the benefits of working with an immigration consultant. So with all that in mind, I'm going to move us right over to our first topic for today, which is the personal information required for a CEC PR application. So, Anthony, my understanding is that the personal information is sort of automatically requested within the IRCC account. Um,
Yes, when obviously you receive your invitation to apply, in a My CIC account below that, you will see something called permanent residency application and continue. And once you go into that, it's got more fields similar to what you did in your profile, only there's a lot more information required. And what it does as well is it pulls the information, obviously, that was in your profile over to the application that you have to continue
right.
on. Yes.
Okay, great. And the first thing that I've got on my list here is bio data about everyone included in the application. So, can you explain a little bit about what that information is?
Well, basically, the bio data is the basic information such as your name, your date of birth, your country of birth, your passport information, passport issue date, passport expiry. Always double check, because in express entry it only asks you to put in your passport number once. So always just take another look at it, make sure the issue date and the expiry date are good, and basically then it goes on to ask you about your previous immigration history and your status, basically. So
Great.
there, a common one is country of residence. Is if you're currently in Canada, which whatever the percentage is,
I think it's
90
about
something percent.
90%. Yeah.
Yeah, of all. So always make sure on that question you're selecting Canada. Obviously, your country of citizenship is whatever country you're a citizen of. and then it goes down. It'll ask you your UCI number and things like that.
Great. And it's then going to request some information about your family.
Yes.
And can you tell me, like, which family members are they asking for information about?
Okay, so it's basically asking information about your immediate family, and it's asking about people who are not included in the application.
Right.
Okay, so that is mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad. Okay, and then obviously brothers, sisters, step siblings also. They're also like so. And if there was family members who were not included in the application, such as a for some reason a child or a partner,
Mm-hmm.
they would also go in that section. Okay,
Great.
if they were not included in the application.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, and I think it's useful for people to be like sometimes people are surprised like what? Why do I have to provide this information? These people aren't coming with me, but it is a mandatory requirement
Yes.
for IRCC. And then the address history is the next bullet point here. So like what? How many addresses do people have to provide? Like everywhere they've lived?
Everywhere they've lived, the question specifically says, do not leave any gaps. And unlike other areas of the application, such as the personal history, the address history basically uh, wants you to put in the specific date, so the day, the month, and the year, from when you were in that residence to when you left that residence. It's a very difficult. It's a very difficult. It takes applicants a long time. Sometimes they have to go on and Google Map or Street View to find
Mm-hmm.
out what number of that place they lived in 9 years ago. You're required to give your address history for 10 years or since you turned 18 years of age, whichever one was sooner.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Um, and let's talk about travel history because I think those two people sometimes confuse the two and aren't sure where one ends and the other one begins. So, can you tell us a little bit about what's required for travel history?
Yeah. So basically, to touch on what you just said, it's also like whenever we go on vacation to Cuba, say Canada is our country of residence now. So we go for a week in Cuba. That is not a residence. It's just that's a vacation. Typically, if you're living in a country, residing in a country, usually from my own personal experience, I'll usually do a month or 6 weeks where you go, okay, it seems like you're residing now at this stage. A month or 6 weeks have passed. Again, there's no set time on that, but you don't need to put in every single place you've ever stayed, including that vacation to Mallorca with mum and dad 5 years ago.
Right.
Okay. So in the travel history, it specifically says, please enter all of the travel history, all of your trips made outside your country of origin and your country of residence. Okay, meaning you do not need to put those two specific, like your country of origin and your country of residence in.
Mhm.
Okay, but every other travel, no matter if it was just one day or the same day, it has to be stated and put in there.
Yeah, so you said, as far as the address history is concerned, you don't need to put every single family vacation in there, but in the travel history, you
Yes.
absolutely do. Uh,
A shopping trip to the United States. So if you pop down to Buffalo, say for instance, a couple of weeks ago for 1 day shopping and came back the same day, you have to put that down. That's travel history.
Although I might ask why you're going to the United States in the middle of a pandemic, Karen.
Fair
What are
enough.
you
Fair enough.
doing? But yeah, you do have to be very comprehensive with the travel history. And I just know we've had that question come in from people previously, like, I came to Canada from Ireland on IEC, and so I was traveling in Canada. So is that in my travel history? And as you said, Anthony, after a certain amount of time, and it's a little bit subjective, travel becomes your new place of residence, and so that would be logged in the address history rather than the travel history. Do I have that right?
Well, I'm just going to add something to that as
Yeah.
well because of the questions are starting to come into my head of all the questions I get. So when putting in your travel history, you have to do it to the best of your ability. Use your passport stamps, use your email to see, look up the flight itineraries,
Yeah.
keywords like Air Canada or Lufthansa, things like that there to help piece together this jigsaw because it's very difficult. How can anyone be expected to remember travel, especially from as long ago as 10 years ago? Another thing is as well for any of our European listeners
Hmm.
or viewers is that because we're members of we all hold a EU passport, we can freely travel Europe, and there's no ports of entry, there's no immigration, so it's very hard to document. There's no stamps in your
This
passport
is
when
actually, we had just had a question come in from Harriet who's asking what
yeah.
happens if you can't remember
So
where you were traveling in Europe. You don't get your passport stamped.
exactly. So what I do with both when I'm representing my clients or when I'm or advising a client, yes, I tell them to sit down and to the best of their ability try and map out where they've been and when they've been. But then I always include or get them to include a small letter of explanation, which anything that you feel needs to be included in the app. We'll get to that later.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's a short statement as basically saying, I have recorded all of my travel history to the best of my ability. As I am a holder of a European passport, my passport is not stamped when I enter fellow neighbouring European countries. Please note that I have never resided in any other country other than Ireland and Canada for periods of more than 6 months in a row. So right. That's all you can do, the best of your ability.
Yeah, you've done your due diligence, and we're going to talk about that document you mentioned, the letter of explanation. It is a useful thing to include in your. I mean, any time that you can't meet the exact specifications or you feel like something needs a little bit more of an explanation, you can always include a letter of explanation with that bundle of documents, just sort of explaining, why this might be the way that it is. We've got a couple questions coming in that I just wanted to clarify here. Alexandra asked, we discussed the family information section a little bit earlier, and she asked, the family information is for members who are not immigrating to Canada, and I just want to clarify. The bio data that you'll be providing is for all of the people who are included in the application, and you're going to have to provide supplementary documents for all of those people. So that's all of the people who are immigrating. There's an additional family information section for your other family members, your immediate family members who are not accompanying to Canada.
So at the top of your application it says personal information, and it's once you click into that, it's the very bottom subcategory.
Great. Okay. And Misha was asking, do you have to include your travel history for different provinces? No, Canada's big. Canada's, the size of many countries combined, but you don't have to include interprovincial travel. Partik is asking about foreign work experience for employment history, which is good timing, Partik. You're not supposed to ask questions before we get to this section, but we're actually just about to get to the employment history section. So can you, Anthony, tell our viewers what is required for the employment history? And I'm just going to preempt a question that we'll get from people. Do you have to include all of your work history in the employment history? Like, what if you can't get documents for some of your previous work experience? What if some of it was unskilled?
Okay, so I imagine we're going to spend a bit of time on this because this is probably one of the most important factors when submitting this application. So we'll basically start from the beginning. Obviously, everyone knows what express entry is, and everyone's always talking about the draws and the points. But what sometimes people forget is eligibility. So number one, eligibility. Everyone on the February 13th, all 27,000 were invited under the Canadian Experience class. So the first thing I would invite you to do is basically go on the IRCC website and read about what is the minimum requirements under the Canadian Experience class. That's most important of all. Okay, so after that, then depending on what the draw is, in this particular draw was a minimum points requirement of 75. Okay, which is, as we all know, very, very, very low. Yeah. So basically, when you're claiming foreign work experience, okay, you don't get points alone for the foreign work experience. It's factored into the skills transferability, where it's matched with other factors like for instance, your language, your Canadian work experience, and education. Education. My apologies. So one thing that not many people know as well is that when you get your skills transferability for 1 year of foreign work history, so 1 year or more, okay, you won't actually increase your points until you get to over 3 years. So
Right.
just to reference, basically, everyone, 2.5 years of foreign work experience is the same as 1 year and 2 months of foreign work experience. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, to answer that question, no, you do not need to list all of your foreign work experience in that section. Okay.
Right.
You only list what you want to claim points on. All right.
Right.
And so, if, for instance, as well as I've seen people as well include occupations that were under a skill type C or D category.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you're it don't include work experience that falls under a NOC C or D skill type category, because, as I said, it's not contributing towards any points. So
Right.
uh, yeah.
So
So go on. Go on.
yeah, my understanding here is like with the employment history, if you put any work experience in the employment history section, it's going to request that you submit your documents proving that work experience.
Yes.
So based on what you just said, and I pulled up our slide on, what to do if information changes. Like based on that, based on what you said, if as long as you still meet the minimum eligibility criteria for the program,
Mhm.
and as long as you still meet the CRS score threshold, whatever the cutoff score was for the draw within which you were invited, then you can move that employment experience out of the employment history, and you would put it in your personal history.
Well, when someone fills out their profile, the only section there is no personal history section. However, they're required to fill out their education in the education section and their work history section.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, the question, I don't blame people. The question isn't very thorough. It says please enter all of your work experience. It's not a very it doesn't explain it very well. What it does is when you get the application, it carries all of that over. So it carries the work experience over to the work experience section of the PR application, and it also carries the education and same work experience down to the personal history section. So for all of you that may have included a long list of jobs in your work history, what I would invite you to do very, very carefully is first of all identify all the jobs uh, that are not contributing towards points. So
Mm-hmm.
any skill type C or D, and you can delete that role. But again, please be very vigilant before you do that. Okay.
Right.
Uh, then in regards to if you've got 10 years of skilled work experience, really and truly, if you've more than 3 years of full-time skilled work experience paid foreign, that is the minimum. I would always invite people to go 3.5 years or 4 years, never leave it on the 3-year mark.
Yeah.
So if you can't prove the work experience also, like, it's impossible. However, your points are still more than without that work experience. Your points still calculate to more than 75 points or 75 or more. You can delete that too. Now what it does then is once you put that work experience in the work history section, it automatically generates an upload button in the
Right.
document checklist. Okay. The system doesn't recognize whether the job is skilled or not. It just
Right.
automatically So when you delete that particular role, it will remove that section.
Great.
I'll just leave as well off on this is when you change things in your work history, there is a section at the bottom. I believe it is when you've completed all of the mandatory fields. It says preview score. Okay. Now, if you go into that section, it's going to tell you now that you've made the changes. It's going to tell you eligibility. Well, under the Canadian Experience class, it should still say met. And
Right.
then it's at the top, it gives you the minimum points required for that your particular draw, which we know is 75. And if you scroll down to the bottom, the the points should stay the same as what was on your invitation, or above 75. One
Right.
of those two.
Yeah, that's great. Above 75, or if you're watching this later on and the cutoff was higher than 75, above whatever the cutoff was.
Yes, yes. This is
Um,
for February 13 draw only.
yeah, and we had Sarah asking what about the documents you need for proof of work history. We are going to get to that in our documentation section. Miguel asked a great question here, which is, do the NOC codes need to match? And I think I can try to answer this one. For the Canadian experience class, we were talking about the like you have to make sure that you meet the minimum eligibility criteria. For CEC regarding work experience, you have to have a minimum of 1 year of full time skilled work experience completed in Canada within the 3 years prior to hitting that submit button on your PR application. Now, that work experience can be obtained in more than one NOC code as long as they are both or all of them are skilled occupations. So NOC 0A or B. And there can be breaks between there can be gaps between the employment. The bear in mind that this is for CEC. Entirely different set of rules apply for the other Express Entry aligned programs. But did I get that right, Anthony?
That is perfectly right. And I would just obviously add to that full time it constitutes a minimum of 30 hours per week.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can also use, for any of you that put in part time work, that are using that part time work experience, that part time work will be, you could can be considered the equivalent of, you can basically what's the word I'm looking for? Take the part-time work experience and change that into what the equivalent of full-time work experience would be. So to give everyone an example, if you were working 6 months as a plumber,
yeah,
at 15 hours per week, that would be the equivalent of 3 months at full time.
Right. So I think it's 1,560 hours is 1 year full-time work experience. Okay.
Yeah.
So you'd add up the hours that you've done.
You add up the hours, but you don't add up any hours more than 30 per week.
Yeah.
Okay, because any excess hours, in excess of 30 hours per week cannot be used to make up for another time where you didn't work 30 hours that week.
Great. Yeah, that's a really good point. And so Swati was asking about what if we included all of our employment history in the initial profile, and now we want to show only Canadian experience. I hope that we answered that question for you, Swati, because I saw you ask it just before Anthony got into that section. Let us know if it's still confusing for you.
Dan, can I just interrupt? Can I just add to that for 1 second as well? Again, please be very careful, everyone, but depending on your education, your age, it is possible to meet the 75 points without foreign work experience. However, please be very vigilant when you're calculating it, and again, go back to eligibility always.
Yeah, and here, let me pull up that slide, and we'll come back to talk about the other information in the profile, but just for what to do if your information changes, I'll just rehash this. If your information changes, like after you've submitted your profile and received your invitation, but before you submit your PR application, so this stage that most of the people from that February 13th are in right now, you can make changes, but you always have to make sure that you still meet the minimum eligibility criteria for the program, and that you still meet the CRS score requirement for the date on which you were drawn. The other thing that we've noted here in just things to be aware of if you're changing your information is be aware of the possibility of misrepresentation. You can't lie in your application, guys. If they figure it out, you'll have like serious consequences. What is, if I remember correctly, it's like 5-year ban from Canada.
Yeah, and then and it would be, even after that, it would be very difficult to come back from. Yes, you can come back, but your word is no longer your bond.
Great. And I see Harriet's asking a clarification question here. I can't obtain work experience from one employer. Should I delete from work history as I have 10 years history in one NOC, or should I create a letter of explanation explaining that I can't obtain?
Again, it depends on it. It wasn't clarified whether it was Canadian work experience or foreign work experience. As long as basically exactly what you said, you can change or delete employment history as long as you maintain eligibility requirements under the Canadian experience class and your points are still over or above 70 or at or above 75 CRS points.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible, Harriet. We can't tell you for sure without knowing the exact details of your profile. We don't want to lead you in the wrong direction. But as long as you're meeting the minimum eligibility criteria, meeting the CRS score cutoff, you can make changes. If you're concerned, guys, this is a high stakes application, especially from this draw because the CRS score cutoff is so low. This is the time when it makes sense to get a professional to look over your application. If you're not sure about something, it's worth forking over the money to have someone with tons of experience look it over. So click that link right there in the pinned comment. You can book a consultation with Anthony to ask a specific question, or you can do a full PR application review once you're ready to submit, and he'll look it over and make sure that if you've made these changes, you still meet the requirements that we've just gone through. Um, Misha says, "Are there any more slides here?" Yes, there are more slides. It takes a long time to get through this stuff. So we wanted to talk about the personal history section. So can you just explain to people, Anthony, what needs to be included in that personal history
Yeah,
section?
no, this is again another good talking point. Is a lot of people always ask me, do I have to prove or demonstrate the information I've put in my personal history? And the answer is no. The personal history is not used to determine eligibility. The personal history is for security purposes, so that they can do the background checks. Make sure you know which countries you've been, where you've worked in the last 10 years, which organizations you've been a member of, education, and everything. So I always tell people, no matter what you've ever done in the last 10 years, everything goes in your personal history. That includes unemployment. That includes all work experience, whether skilled or skill type 0 or B or C and D. Everything, all education, all membership with organizations, with no gaps. So yeah, and again, to reiterate, you do not need to prove. You don't need documents to prove anything that's in your personal history.
Right. Great. And the last thing on our personal information section was just the mandatory questions. We don't need to go into a ton of detail about this, but they are going to ask you a list of mandatory questions like have you had previous applications refused for
Correct.
Canadian immigration? Have you ever committed a crime? Or I don't know the exact question, but it is a series of questions. You've got to be honest in that section. Um, uh,
What I would say is anyone that's answered yes in that section, there is a little box that obviously it asks you to explain, but always include an additional something. Sometimes that box is not enough to put in a full explanation as to
right.
why it's a yes. So always include that in a separate letter of explanation.
Great. So I'm going to jump to our slide on what if information changes. So we've gone over this section on what happens if your information changes before submitting your PR application. If your information changes after your PR application, this is really important. You can't make changes to the vast majority of information after you click submit. Once you click submit, it's done. If you realize you forgot to attach a police certificate or you forgot to include a piece of travel history, like you can't fix that. It's in their hands. However, there are certain instances of personal data changing where you are actually obligated to update your personal information, and that can be done using the IRCC web form. Um, and that's just related to things like if your address changes, your marital status changes, if you have children, um, updates to. Is it your personal data? Is that what I would call that, Anthony?
Yeah, basically you covered it all there.
Okay.
Address, marital status change, or sorry, relationship change, or a new addition to the family.
Yeah.
Or as well, if sometimes unfortunately people are arrested or charged with a crime in between that time, and that is as well necessary to update them on that.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't know that. So don't get arrested for crimes, people. We shouldn't have to tell you that. So we've got a ton of questions coming in from people about like NOC codes, work experience letters. We're getting there. So just hang tight with us. We are going to get to our discussion on the work reference letters here in a moment, and that does lead us nicely into our required documents section. And you'll see it's the fifth one down there, guys. So we're going to get there soon. So required documents. Let's jump into it. Required documents. We've divided this into two sections: the required documents for everybody, and then the required documents for some people. And you'll see this little note here at the top of the slide. Always refer to your personalized document checklist to know what you need to include with your application. You know, what one person needs to include may not be identical to what another person needs to include. So you should always be checking what's been automatically generated within the system for you. That being said, some of the documents are mandatory for everyone. So let's jump into that. Passports. Anthony, passports need to be included for everyone on the application?
Everyone on the application, correct. So that is obviously principal applicant, accompanying spouse, common law partner, and then obviously any children, dependents on the application.
Great.
And it's the primary page is which should always appear as the first PDF. Is your just the biodata page. So that's the page with your photo and your passport information. And then what you include after that would be things like any amendments to the passport and visas and stamps. Okay.
Great.
You're not required to put in blank pages of your passport. Okay.
Okay. That's good to know because that's a lot of extra work if you don't need it. The next document I got here is the language test results. So
Yeah,
what?
you want it?
Sorry.
No, sorry. I'll let you finish.
Oh yeah, language test results. So what? What do people have to submit for their language tests?
Okay, so the actual test itself is not a mandatory document. Okay, however, the information that you entered in on your profile, as I said, there's 4 different language tests with different reference codes and
Yeah.
PIN numbers, but that you need to, again, even though you put it in your profile, please go check your application again. Yes, it does carry over, but just take another look at it. Okay,
Yeah.
make sure that everything's correct, the expiry, the date of issuance, sorry, the date you took the exam, the date the exam was issued, or the results were issued, the reference number and pins, and then obviously the scores themselves. Okay. What we do generally though, if you have the document, we include it. We do, because it does say in the operation manuals that although this is not a mandatory document, it could be requested at later on in the application.
Yeah.
So what we typically do is in the education section, and we can get to PDFs later on, because again, it's a reason a lot of applications are cancelled, is usually we've got, say, the degree. Then if the transcripts are there, that's great. Then we throw in the WES, and right at the bottom we throw in the language test result. Why not? You've got the document.
I think that's great too, because as you mentioned, like, you have to enter in all of the data pieces from the language test, and that like reference code, at least from what I remember seeing like IELTS exams, it's like just a string of random letters and numbers, and if you enter something in wrong, that's a grounds for refusal. So if you can tack it on somewhere in the application, I think that's a great strategy. We do have a couple questions coming in here about passports. Kanatu and Pedro are both in situations where they have either children or spouses who have passports that are going to be expiring soon. Like, Kanatu says, like, my children's passport expires 14 days after we'll be submitting the application. Pedro says his wife's passport expires within the next year. Should they be renewing their passports in advance?
No, what they should do is obviously passports from every country in the world now is taking longer than what it usually takes due to COVID-19. So if your passport is valid, submit your permanent residency application before your passport expires, and then immediately then apply for your new passport. Once the new passport comes, you scan the passport, the bio page, and any other relevant pages, and then basically submit a web form to update it to add the new passport to your application.
Great. Wonderful. And related, Naina is asking, what about expired passports? Can you submit an expired passport?
No, like I get that question a lot. The requirements it basically states is of your current passport. Okay, uh, there's no uh, there's no requirement to submit. I'll come back on and double check, but there's no requirement to submit expired passports unless they were requested you to do so after the application was submitted.
Right. But the passport that you do submit with your application has to be valid.
Has to be valid.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Kanadu has a similar question, but about the language test results, and I think it will outline a really important point. Kanadu asks, "What if my IELTS expires 3 months after submission? Do I need to do a new test?" Can you sort of outline for people like where the expiration matters for the IELTS? Because I know there's an important point in the application
It's
process.
so it's actually at the test results, if valid, are locked in on the day you make an application for permanent residency.
Great.
Okay, so yeah. So if this, so my apologies, I've got the name. If you submit,
Yeah, it's
like
Kanadu.
Kanadu, my apologies, Kanadu. If you submit the application before the expiry of your IELTS or your CELPIP, it's considered locked in, and it doesn't matter. The expiry date in 3 months now does not matter.
Right. But importantly, there, your IELTS expiry date does not lock in on the date that you receive your invitation to apply.
That's a
It's
really
on
good
the
point.
date that you submit the PR application. So let's say your IELTS expires, let's say March 25th of this year. If you have not submitted your final PR application by that date, you will have to retake the exam and submit new language test results with your PR application. Uh,
That's a really good point.
yeah,
Really good point.
because I think that's if people don't know that, that could be grounds for accidentally getting refused because you didn't realize that your tests had expired. Yeah, and Mercedes is asking, is it the same with the ICAS results? So all of the document, the language test and the ECA documents, they're locked in on the date that you submit the PR application.
Unlocked in your date. So any ECA report is valid for 5 years
Yeah,
from 5 years from the day it was issued, and your language test, the language test is good for 2 years since the day you wrote the exam. And when you submit your permanent residency application, yes, that they're locked in as of that date.
great. So we're gonna move on because we still got a lot to get through here. We wanted to talk about medical exams. I know people have to do a medical exam with their PR application. What do they have to submit with that? Is that even possible right now? Like I know, it seems kind of sketchy to go see doctors sometimes.
Actually, no. A lot of the clinics are still open. So first of all, you have to basically go to the immigration IRCC website and basically find the list of panel approved physicians, panel approved doctors. There's a list there. Uh, so it'll ask you to it'll ask you to country. So you say Canada if you're already here, and it'll ask you to province, and then it'll just give you a long list with the doctor's name, the clinic's name, the address, and the phone number. So try and find one it's located in your area. Call them up, inform them that you would like to book an upfront medical exam for the purpose of express entry, and then they're going to ask you to bring your passport. And any medication that you're currently taking, and if you wear glasses, bring your glasses too. Okay.
Great.
Obviously, you'll do your medical exam. Once the medical exam is done, do not leave. Like ask the doctor or the administrative team, because you should be given a document. It's sometimes 1 page, sometimes it's 2 pages, and that is your proof of medical exam document. It has your photo at the top center, and I believe it does. It says e-medical in the top left-hand corner, and then it's just all information, your bio data, your passport. So make sure that you leave with that document. I do know that some clinics email it afterwards, but just make sure that you know that it's on its way.
Great. And so I've got two important sidebars here. First sidebar is a COVID sidebar. If you can't get to doing your medical exam because of COVID right now, is that one of the places where they're being a little bit lenient due to COVID?
Yes, yes, they are. So if you're going to do that, you still have to make efforts. And
Yeah.
what I would do is, when you, instead of calling, maybe email a couple of the clinics, and then when you get that email back saying, unfortunately, we're closed right now, save up those emails into a PDF, and then and as I said, try and get, because it's better for you if you can get the exam done. But if not, you can definitely request an additional 90 days. You must give a letter of explanation, basically inciting COVID as the main reason why you cannot get a medical exam.
Great.
And then what I would suggest is tack on the emails,
Yeah.
all the emails you received saying it wasn't possible at this time.
Yeah, I think that's great. Because yeah, I think that people don't necessarily realize that, like, with these COVID exemptions, that that IRCC is still rejecting applications. You have to,
Yes.
provide some evidence that you were absolutely not able to get these required documents or meet these requirements because of COVID. And so, attaching any sort of evidence like those emails is something that you can do to prove that. The other note that I wanted to address here, Karam is asking, since being invited to apply, we've had a serious medical diagnosis. How much impact will this have on a PR application? So just a quick explanation here. Sorry to hear about the diagnosis, Karam. I hope that that you and your family are able to resolve it. But as far as affecting Canadian immigration, when they're doing the medical exam, they're doing it to assess for two things. They're doing it to assess, does this person pose a risk to public health and safety in Canada, which people aren't often rejected for that. But the other thing is, will this person cause excessive demand on the Canadian healthcare system? And that's because Canada's healthcare system is taxpayer funded, and Canadian experience class, it's an economic immigration system. As you know, ethically ethically it's a little bit cloudy, but Canada wants to make sure that the immigrants who are coming in are able to sort of contribute their weight in terms of the taxes and the services that they're taking from the system. As far as medical inadmissibility is concerned, my understanding is that it's about, what, $18,000 a year, something like that.
I
um,
don't actually have the figure right now, and I do know that one thing about medical inadmissibility is that it's a case by case
yeah.
basis. Just because two people have the same suffering from the same condition doesn't mean it's necessarily the same outcome. What I would advise, so what was my apologies, Dan? What was the person's name?
It was Karam.
Karan. Well, again, Karan, I'm sorry to hear about that news. And what I would advise you to do, I believe there's still another 50 something days
Yeah.
to submit your PR application. So, what I would suggest that you do is go online and find an immigration lawyer or a registered immigration consultant, Canadian immigration consultant, who specializes in medical inadmissibility. Please don't just go to any, like, even including myself, we do not specialize in medical inadmissibility. But there's only, I would say, there's only reputable wise, there's probably only a handful of people in Canada. So book an appointment with one of them, and they will advise on how you should proceed.
Great. Yeah, it is really it really is done on a case by case basis, and I think that's a mark of your trustworthiness, Anthony. I don't think there are a ton of people who would come on and say, "Don't go with me. I actually don't know how this works. Go with
There's not
someone
many.
else."
It's a
But
real specialty
yeah,
area, and yeah. So you usually pay a little bit of extra money for it because of it is a highly specialized area. But trust me, it's worth it. 100%. So do that.
yeah, and it's complicated. It's constantly changing. I used to do a lot of activism and like advocacy on the part of people living with HIV who are trying to immigrate to Canada, because this was a barrier to them. And it's, I mean, it's ethically, we could have a bigger conversation about it, but we'll leave it at that for now. So let me see what is next on our list. Oh, so we're going to go into the police certificates and then the proof of work experience for our next slides. But before we do that, I actually wanted to show everybody a fun website that you may not have seen before. So this is on the Canadian government website. It's on canada.ca, and I'll pop a link to this into the comment section in just a moment. But this is actually from the operational guidelines that IRCC staff members use themselves when they're assessing permanent residence applications submitted through Express Entry. It's called the completeness check. It's kind of hard to find if you don't know where it is. You guys have all been on the Canadian government website. You know that it's a maze, which is why I'm going to share the URL for you. But on this webpage, they've got a ton of details on all of the required documents. So you can go through and they kind of explain exactly what needs to be submitted for all of the documents. So if you are looking for more information, if you're looking for primary sources from the government of Canada about the documents you need to submit, this webpage is a really great place to start. So I'm just pulling that up before we get into these more complicated documents that you guys can have a resource to consult on your own. With that in mind, the next thing we're talking about is police certificates. Police certificates are a big document, an important document, a very common reason that people are rejected. Anthony, what is a police certificate and who requires it for which places?
Okay, so police certificates are required for any country, including your country of origin, for where you resided for 6 months in a row since the age of 18. Okay, or for express entry purposes, 10 years. I need to double check that actually. I believe it's 10 years for express entry. Uh, I will get that information before we're done. So yes, it's 6 months in a row. So that's 183 consecutive days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uh, Now for the country, we'll start off with we'll do it in increments. Okay. So let's start with Canada. Again, we said earlier that 90% of all of the applicants that received an invitation will be in Canada. Regardless of whether you've resided in Canada for 6 months or less or more, you're not presently required to submit an RCMP background check. Okay,
Yeah.
so it is not a requirement. However, IRCC during the application can request one. It happens every so often. Again, sometimes it's just a quality control check, but for the purpose of submission and completeness check, Canadian RCMP check is not required.
Yeah, the Canadian government departments, they all share your data with each other, so you can rest easy knowing that they surveil you.
So, any other country where you've resided for 6 months in a row, you are required to present a police certificate. Now, be very careful. Every country has a different policy, a different way of applying, and how you can start is go on to the IRCC website and go to the section about police certificates and how to apply for a police certificate, and it will break every country down by alphabetical order and give instructions on how to proceed in obtaining the document. Now, okay, this is where it gets. Everyone's really got to pay attention. If you received your police certificate after, and I mean after, you have left that country, since the last time you stayed there for 6 months in a row. So you stayed there for 6 months in a row. You left. You got your police certificate, and you've never gone back for 6 months in a row. That police certificate is still valid, even if it's more than 6 months, even if it's 8 years or 7 years old. Okay, but the really important thing to remember is, folks, is you had to have left the country, then received it, and even if you went back for a month or 2 months, a couple of years later, that's okay.
Yeah.
You still do not require. It's still that police certificate is still valid. Okay.
Great.
If you were in that country when you received your police certificate, okay, and then you left that country, that police certificate is no longer valid. Okay, especially if it's no longer your country of residence. Also, what am I not covering? Oh, yeah, country of residence. So for country of residence, so where you are right now, for just the 10% of people who are not in Canada,
yeah,
you must obtain a police certificate from your current country of residence, and it can have been issued no more than 6 months ago.
Great.
So it has to be issued less than 6 months ago.
Great.
All right. Dane, I suppose we can just touch on it because it's usually the IEC applicants.
Exactly what I was going to bring up. Yep.
Do you want? I'll let you take that off if you want.
Well, I'll lay out the example because I know we have a lot of IEC people in our community who have come through the working holiday, and then they get enough work experience, and then they apply for PR. So with IEC, with your application, this is a separate immigration program. If you didn't come through it, just bear with us for the example. you have to submit a police certificate with your IEC application, but you're usually still in your country, in that country that you're applying from. So, for example, we've got a guy who's 24, he's in Ireland, and he's applying to come through IEC. So, 2 months before he travels to Canada, or even a month before he travels to Canada, he applies for that police certificate from Ireland, and then he flies over to Canada and decides to apply for PR through Express Entry 3 years later. Is that police certificate that he got from Ireland for IEC, is that still valid? And based on what you said, Anthony, my understanding
The,
would be no.
the answer is no. The answer is no. So, as well, we'll give another example because this is a very important topic. If, say, the same person you spoke about went to Australia for a year, left Australia, and came back to Ireland and went, I'm going to go to Canada now. If he applies part of the IEC, he would be required to produce a police certificate from Australia. Since now he is in Ireland and he's applying for his Australian police certificate, as long as he never goes back and lives for Australia for 6 months in a row, that police certificate, because he was in Ireland, the Australian police certificate, because he was in Ireland when he received it, is going to continue to remain valid.
Great.
However, and I like to give this example out, let's say, for instance, you're in Australia, you're finishing up your holiday, your working holiday. The 1st of December, you get your police certificate. And then on the 2nd of December or the 3rd of December, you fly out of Australia. That police certificate is not valid for permanent residency.
Even within like 2 or 3 days of departure.
Even even within 2 or 3 days of departure, correct.
Okay. Wowza. That's they are strict. um, Sheldon asked us if I visited the U.S. for 3 days, would I need to have a police record? So Sheldon, as Anthony said, it's only for countries where you've lived for 6 months or more consecutively. So a 3-day trip to somewhere would not warrant a police certificate. If you visited the U.S. for 6 months, then you would need a
We
police
can
certificate.
actually as well. Obviously, the rules are 6 months in a row, but obviously we get a lot of clients that have gone to New Zealand or Australia or the USA for 5 months or 5.5 months. Now there's a very good possibility, even though they were not required to submit the police certificate, if you feel that it was close to 6 months mark, even if you know that it wasn't, sometimes if it's possible to do so, apply for the police certificate regardless. That way, if you're asked for it or you can submit it with your application, okay, you may save time
Yeah.
in the long run.
Well, and a good like the U.S. is a good example for that. The FBI police clearance. At least when I used to be on the administrative side of this, that would take like 4 months to obtain. So if you'd been there for 5 months and then they ended up requesting it, but you didn't have it, it could actually delay your application processing by like a full 4 months while you wait for them to come through and give you that. So it's just a little bit.
Lastly, then
Yeah.
sorry if we're going to go on from police certificates. Color. It is mandatory. If it is mandatory to scan or take a photo of your police certificate in color. If you submit in black and white, your application can be rejected as incomplete. Now, that being said, some countries only issue the police certificate. Like, for instance, I believe the United States, the FBI background clearance is only a black and white document. Now, they are aware of that. But even if it's a black and white document and someone signed with a blue pen, if you submitted that in black and white, that could be rejected as incomplete.
Oh wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So always, no matter what I always tell my clients to do, no matter if the police certificate's in black and white or multicolored or whatever, always scan in color.
Okay, great. That's I didn't know that, and it's pretty startling how strict they are. Just as we get ready to move on to the next section, I'm just going to show off a quick guide on the Moving to Canada website. If you want more information about police certificates, we have a really simple, straightforward guide explaining them. So you can consult this. I'm just putting a link to it in the comment section now. Or if you're not entirely sure about this and police certificates are confusing and they're one of the most common reasons for having an application refused, this is one of the situations when it would make sense. Click that link in the pinned comment, book a consultation with Anthony, and he'll review the police certificate needs for your specific application. Great. So with that in mind, we're going to move on to Work reference letters, work experience documents. We've got a guide for this on the Moving to Canada website as well that I've pulled up. But before we dive too deep into that, I'm going to turn to you for your expertise, Anthony. Proof of work experience. What are they asking for? I know
Okay,
this is
yeah.
one of the most complicated documents.
And this is, yeah, so we've just gone from one beast to another. But arguably, I would say that the majority of applications run into complications due to the proof of work experience, which also includes selection of your NOC code. Okay, so when you're claiming whether it's Canadian work experience or foreign work experience, the requirements of the letter of employment are the same. So basically, I'll say it so everyone can write it down or watch it later. So obviously, the letter must state your full name. Okay, you know. Then it must give your occupation slash job title, or whatever you've been your occupation you referred to.
Great.
Uh, it must give your duration of employment. Okay, specifically give dates. Don't especially if you're close to, maybe you've got 1 year and 3 weeks of Canadian work experience, but you're only putting down a month and a year. Well, they have to actually calculate that you've got 365 days, and it's
Yeah.
hard to do without dates. So very important to go put down dates, specific dates, all for the duration of employment. If as well, uh, a common thing that I see as well is with people who are currently employed in their job, and it's in their express entry application profile, which is carried over to the PR application. Obviously, the letter will say from this period, this date until present. But please check the date the letter was written, because present equals that date. So you may have got that letter of experience 3 months ago, and you think, oh, it says present, but it's not. It's
Right.
only present equals 3 months ago. So that's a common, again, we all missed that one, and it's easily missed. The letter must have your hours per week. Okay,
Great.
hours per week. It must state your salary or your hourly pay. It has to state one of them. Okay,
Okay.
your salary or hourly pay, and benefits if applicable. Uh, and then, if we're going to say the most important thing in any letter of employment, it has to stipulate or state your primary duties and responsibilities of the position that you are working or previously worked. We always recommend between 6 and 8 of the primary duties and responsibilities.
Great.
I just want to let everyone know that IRCC does not base the NOC that you've selected from the occupation title that was on your letter. They base the NOC that you've selected by looking and reviewing the duties and responsibilities on your letter of employment. So it's extremely important that they are present in the letter. The letter must be signed by, it can be from multiple people. It could be a supervisor, a manager, HR, someone who is your, what's the word? It's not subordinate. What's the one? Or
I want to say
I was
superior, but that seems not right. A supervisor,
superior.
supervisory or managerial position, I suppose.
Exactly, or owner operator,
Yeah.
CEO, one of those. It's got to as well obviously state the author, whoever that was, the supervisor's name and their designation, and they can give their contact details. And then finally, the letter, make sure it's signed, and the letter must be presented on company letterhead, which usually includes contact details too.
Great. I think that's a very good explanation. I'm going to reiterate here. I think the most important thing to take away from that, when they're assessing your NOC code, remember, you have to meet the minimum eligibility criteria for the program. That means you have to show that you worked in a skilled position. That's NOC skill level 0, A, or B. When they're assessing the skill level of your position, they are not looking at the occupation title. I mean, they might could like briefly consider that, but what they're really
Yeah,
looking at is the duties and responsibilities listed on your reference letter, and they're comparing those to the duties and responsibilities in the NOC database. Now, they're they shouldn't be like a copy paste. Um, is that right? That's what I've heard.
yeah,
Like you
yeah.
can't
It's
like
common. Yeah, a lot of people are trying to, they're like, oh, because no, we've all looked at the NOC code, and obviously there's no perfect NOC code. Other than maybe a plumber. You know what I mean, or
yeah,
something that is directly. But most jobs, well, you can see that it fits mostly or correlates mostly to that NOC, but nothing ever fits perfectly. As long as the NOC that you've chosen is the closest resemblance to what you do. And what a lot of people do is they copy and paste the NOC, which you should not do.
No,
You should not do that.
they'll recognize that, and it can cause some issues. You gotta be truthful about what your duties and responsibilities are. And I've also heard to like pay attention to the top, like the closer the duties are to the top of the NOC database, like the more important they are to show on the reference
Yeah,
letters.
typically they usually start from the most important, and then they get a little bit more, not less important, but what's the word? Just they start usually with the primary importance, but
Yeah, I guess order of priority.
order of yes. But as long as you feel there's no other code that matches your job closer than the one that you feel is appropriate selected, then that should be your NOC code.
Yeah, so I see Mike here is asking, is there a service that determines your NOC code based on your duties and responsibilities? He says, I've spent a long time selecting my NOC as it's a little bit unclear. Is that like something that you are able to do, Anthony?
Yeah, we do it in a consultation. NOC codes it's funny, and I understand his pain. Sometimes even because there's so many occupations now. Obviously, it's always nice to get a plumber because you go, oh, there you go, that's your code. But there's jobs now where there's duties and responsibilities from multiple NOCs, and you have to then argue which one's the most appropriate. So we
Yeah.
offer a consultation where we sit down, we basically break down what they actually do, and then we go from there and
Great.
advise on how to proceed.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable. You can click the link in the pinned comment there, Mike, if you're interested in checking out the consultations with Doherty Fultz. And oh, I had something to say and it just slipped my mind. This is what happens when we do these in the late afternoon. Regarding the NOC codes, no, it's gone. We'll come back to it later. We'll do a couple more questions here. Harriet is asking a great question
Mm-hmm.
that leads us into what to do if you can't get exactly what you need. So Harriet says, I can't get a reference letter from one company as it's no longer operating. I have my original offer letter and pay slips for 4 of 5 months. Is that acceptable?
Okay, so what I would say is it Harriet? My apologies, Harriet.
Yeah.
Is that what name? Harriet. So what I would say to Harriet is, well, first of all, what we mentioned earlier on in the video is take a look to see if it's possible to remove that work experience from your profile without affecting eligibility and or CRS points. Okay, making sure that you're still above 75.
Great.
If that is not, if you require you require that particular work experience to meet eligibility or to meet the CRS points requirement, I would suggest you would book a consultation because it gets tricky. There's a lot of you have to basically prove everything that I just said on that letter of employment without being able to get a letter of employment.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be difficult. So in that case, if that experience is mandatory to your application and CRS parts, I would advise booking a consultation.
Yeah, I think that's great advice here. I'm going to pop a link here in the comments section, and we've got a resource on the Moving to Canada website that might be of use as well. So let me pull this up. So we put together this guide on work reference letters for Express Entry that provides you with a pretty good overview of a lot of the things that Anthony has been explaining. But we've also got a section here on what to do if you can't get a work reference letter for Express Entry. So let me just jump down to that section. And one of the things that we do note here is that any time that you're submitting a document that's outside of what IRCC stipulates is the requirement, there's always a risk that it could be refused or rejected. It's only ever accepted at the discretion of the person who's assessing your application. So we strongly recommend submit exactly what they're asking for. I am not telling you that if you submit any of these alternative options for documents that you'll be okay. No, there is a risk that if you submit the alternates, you will be refused. But sometimes, you can't get what's required. In which case, you got to do the best that you can. You'll see that we've outlined on this page a reiteration of what Anthony said you've got to make sure that you still meet your program requirements, make sure that you still meet your CRS score requirement, and then we go through some alternate documents that you can submit: pay slips, tax forms, records of employment, personal letters from former coworkers. You can get as creative as you want. Media stories about the company that mentioned you, bank account statements with pay deposits highlighted. The further away that you're getting from the required documents, the higher the risk that you'll be refused. And there's a risk with anything that's not the required document. But just if you guys are wondering if you're really in a bind, those are some examples of substitute documents. But really, the best thing that you can do in that scenario is book a consultation with a consultant like Anthony, who will be able to take a look, and based on his experience with decisions made on these types of applications, will be able to advise you on the best decisions you can make to give yourself the strongest chance of approval. Great. Hopefully I summarized that well enough.
No, this is good. What about as well with the Canadians? Because obviously we're speaking about Canadian experience class today. So what I always tell people too, pay slips are not necessary. But if you've got your T4, you can add your pay slips if you wish after your Canadian letter of employment. But I always say to my clients too, even though it's not mandatory, you can add your T4 afterwards too, for each period of employment. Because it does say again in the guide that you presented earlier, the operation manuals, it does say a T4 is not a mandatory document. However, we may request it at a later stage.
Great.
So why not give it to them if you've got it?
And that's perfect. You preempted Phil's question. He just asked, aside from the employment letter, do we need to include T4 pay slips? Just T4. So you got it there. And like Mercedes is asking, like, can we use LinkedIn to prove that someone was working with a company? Again, Mercedes, like anything aside from the required documents has a risk of rejection. So you should be trying your absolute best not to use LinkedIn to prove anything.
No one document is ever going to prove it without you know what I mean? It's got to be multiple documents from multiple sources that basically, that capture all of the requirements of a letter of employment.
Great. We've got a ton of questions coming in about these. So we have a few people, Carmen and Amit, are asking about self-employment. And I'm just going to level with you guys because we want to keep this live stream within a reasonable amount of time. We're not going to have time to go into self-employment. The document requirements for self-employment are much more extensive than even just for regular employment. So if you are a self-employment person, again, this is a situation where we're going to recommend booking a consultation.
And what I will just add to that, Dane, too, self-employment cannot be used towards Canadian experience class eligibility.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I hope that's not terrible news.
So any periods of self-employment in Canada, work experience, cannot be used towards your eligibility in a CEC or CRS points.
Great. Okay, that's really good.
You can only usually use self-employment when it comes to to foreign work experience. It's accepted as foreign work experience and eligibility in the FSW and the FST, but not Canadian experience class.
Okay, that's very good to know. Aline is asking, do you need a letter of explanation if you're not including foreign work experience? So, Aline, it's not necessary to have any foreign work experience for the Canadian experience class. You can easily meet foreign experience doesn't help you meet the minimum eligibility criteria at all. It can help you meet the CRS score requirement, but not necessarily. So there are tons of people who are successful through CEC without, claiming any foreign work experience.
It's just so funny that we're used to gathering every single document we can to get the CRS score up to 454 or whatever it was previously, so yeah, but exactly what you said.
Yeah, and now we're like, well, it's 75, so it's a lot of leeway. And Emmett was also asking about gaps in your career within the last 10 years. Emmett, there's no issue with gaps in your career. They're not considering that. They want to know, do you meet the minimum eligibility criteria? Do you meet the CRS score requirement? There can be gaps in your career. That's not it's not a problem. Do I have that right, Anthony?
Oh yeah, there can be gaps in your Canadian work experience. There can be gaps in your foreign work experience in regards to CRS points or eligibility under the CEC. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, great. So let's move on to our next topic because we are approaching the end here. Let me check if and I did put that URL for the employment reference letters on the Moving to Canada website. You can check that out if you want more information. Check out the operational instructions that we linked to earlier, or work experience and police certificates. These are two major reasons for refusal. Book a consultation with Anthony if you're at all worried about being approved or denied for these documents. So let's move on to our next section here. We're going to go... Oh, no, we still have a few more required documents for everyone. Digital photos, we're not going to go into a ton of detail there. It is a required document for everyone, so I included it here, but you do have to submit a digital photo with your application. And then we got two questions, and I've seen questions about the funds coming in throughout the live stream. So, Anthony, what do people need to do for proof of funds if they are applying specifically through the Canadian Experience class?
Exactly. Okay, so this information is only for people who are applying under the Canadian Experience class. Okay, so under the Canadian Experience class, the CEC, there is no requirement to have settlement funds. Okay, whether you're inside of Canada or outside of Canada, if you meet the requirements of the CEC, you are not, as part of the eligibility, you are not required to have settlement funds. Now, I understand that in the profile, everyone would have put in a certain amount. Some people put in, it doesn't matter. People put in $1,000, $100,000, or whatever. Now, then they feel pressurized now that they've been invited under the CEC, going, oh, how am I going to prove this? Okay, so there's two things that you can do, and Dane, you can correct me if I'm wrong. In the upload section, once you get to the section where it's going to request that you upload your proof of funds, you can include a letter simply stating, please, to whom it may concern, please note that settlement funds are not part of the Canadian Experience class. I am not providing them. Okay.
Great.
Or you can go back to your application. Okay. I believe it's in the family section of the personal. It's in the personal information family subsection, very first question. That's where you'll find the question where I asked you about settlement funds. If you go back there and you change that to 0, okay, the numeral 0, okay, what that will do is that will take away the upload option to upload the settlement fund. So there's no longer a reason to explain or upload any document.
Great.
Okay, so that would be the two pieces of advice. You could use either one.
Yeah. So Canadu,
only for Canadian Experience class.
Yes, for FSW and FST, you're going to need to show proof of funds or proof that you have a valid job offer in Canada. But that's a whole different can of worms. So Canadu, just to clarify here, was asking, we see that proof of funds is not required, but the checklist is saying that it is required. So this is that exact scenario, Canadu. You can either edit the proof of funds amount to 0 and it should remove the upload requirement, or you can always submit a letter of explanation just saying, like, I'm applying through Canadian Experience class, I don't need proof of funds. I mean, make it sound nicer than that, but don't swear at IRCC. It's a good starting place. Great. So the other required document that I also have a question mark next to here is the biometrics requirement. So biometrics, it is required for permanent residence applications. The reason we put a question mark here is twofold. First, the biometrics isn't required until after you submit your PR application. So if they need it from you, they're going to write you and say, like, we need this now, give it to us. But the other reason we put a question mark beside that is because there's a temporary public policy in place right now. They brought it in due to COVID, where if you are a temporary residence applicant, so you've come to Canada previously as a visitor, student, worker, and you've had to provide biometrics for that temporary residence application, you are exempt from the biometrics requirement. There might be a time limit on that, like it might be within the last 10 years or something, but just be aware, because it is within the last 10 years? Okay.
10 years.
Great. Just be aware that if you have come to Canada recently and you did your biometrics, you might be exempt under this temporary public policy. If you're watching this later on after COVID, check the regulations, because they might stop that temporary public policy. Although I'm kind of hopeful they'll just leave it in place, because it seems to make a lot of sense to not have people do it twice. Great. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, so let's see if we can rattle through some of these required documents if applicable. The first one here is the one we're going to spend the most time on, and that is the proof of education. Because, Anthony, we were chatting yesterday, and you told me that proof of education is actually one of the most common reasons why people are refused for Canadian Experience class. So, can you explain that? Why are people refused, and what do they need to include?
Yeah, so what we see a lot of the time is, because obtaining an ECA report can be so stressful and arduous and lengthy, uh, that people don't realize the reason you're applying for ECA report, yes, it's to have your foreign credential evaluated or equivalent to Canadian, but it's to use that reference number to enter into your application. In the again, the operation manuals you pointed to earlier, it does state that the ECA report is not a mandatory document that needs to be included in the application. However, people don't realize that. They think that that was the primary document, that they no longer needed their degree or diploma. So uh, it is mandatory that you upload a copy of your degree, your master's degree, your diploma, or whatever certificate. If you're applying through a bachelor and a diploma, you must include both of them. Okay.
Right.
If you're applying, you've got Canadian education, you need to upload the same thing, your degree, your diplomas, all of what you're claiming, and the transcripts from the Canadian university or college. Okay, that's also important.
Great.
Uh, Now, what people always ask me then, well, will I upload my EC report? Will I not? Will I upload my language? So what we always tell people is, let's say, for instance, someone has a master's degree. Well, as some people realize, in the express entry, it only allows you to upload one PDF. However, a PDF can have multiple pages if you combine them, and which you're definitely going to have to do in regards to majority application, because most things might have 2 pages
Yeah.
more than. So what we just do is, obviously the primary document would be the master's degree for say. Okay, make sure again, uh, if any document, I don't know if we're going to cover this, then, but any document that is not in English or French must be
Oh,
translated. So
we
that
are. Yeah.
includes your master's degree. For everyone in Ireland who's got the Latin degrees, yes, please contact the university in Ireland and ask for a copy of the English version of that degree.
These
Yes,
little things you wouldn't think of. You wouldn't
yeah,
think of
yeah.
it, but yeah.
Apparently, you can't submit Latin. Anyway, so the master's degree, important, Robin, on master's degree, then you can include your transcripts if you have them, then your WES, and at the very end you can include your language, and that way you included everything, and all is good.
Great. And we've got a question coming in here from Phil who's asking, how long is the ECA valid for?
5 years from you received when it
Yeah.
was issued.
So it has a pretty lengthy validity period. The language test, if you remember, only valid for 2 years. So it's more common that people's language tests are expiring than the ECA report. Another thing to note here, guys, is that education, there's actually no minimum education requirement for the Canadian experience class. Okay, so you may not need your proof of education in order to meet the minimum eligibility requirements. Often, like in other draws that where the CRS score is not 75 points, people need the education in order to hit the minimum CRS score requirement. But because it's so low this time, it might not be necessary to have that education, those points from the education. But I mean, definitely, as we keep mentioning, if you're making any changes to the information or the documents that you're including, you always have to make sure that you still meet the eligibility requirements and the CRS score requirements. Um, Great. So let's see. Uh, and Carmen's asking, do I need to include like high school diploma and transcripts? Is it just it's you just have to provide education documents for education that you're claiming? Is that
That
right?
you're claiming for what you're claiming points on.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's like usually people are not claiming points for high school education.
Typically no. Sometimes yes, but typically no.
Yeah, you get a lot more points for post secondary education, so it's much more common. That's what people are claiming for. But yeah.
What I wanted to add, because actually you just made me think of this, Dane, as well, is we keep reiterating about eligibility, maintaining eligibility status under the CEC and the 75 points. What I want to let people know is, yes, you can remove documents while maintaining that. We can't stipulate that enough.
Yeah.
But for instance, if you miss a document, let's say you did not upload your master's degree, okay, and you only uploaded your WES. Even though, Dan, you said you didn't need it for points, which you did not, you are correct. And even though you did not need it for eligibility, that application will still be cancelled as incomplete because you submitted an incomplete application, regardless of whether you needed that document or not.
That's a incredibly important point. Yeah, it's not like you just can't submit a document because without it you'll still meet the points threshold. You have to set your application up in a way where they're requesting certain things from you, and if they're not requesting something from you, you don't have to submit it. But if they are requesting something from you, you have to submit something. So yeah, don't leave something blank or leave something out because you think it won't affect your eligibility. Um, the system can kind of be fandangled to best suit your situation, but you cannot leave things out. That's a really good point, Anthony. Um, Great. So, uh, yeah, Phil is asking, my ECA states the wording 1 year Canadian college certificate. So is this classed as a post secondary certificate? Yes. 1 year of Canadian college, my understanding. I'd have to look at the actual document, so maybe I won't formally say that, Phil, but it sounds like it. And yeah, if you want any specific guidance, I'd say book a consult with Anthony. Okay, let's rattle through some of these quickly. It's 3:25 where I am. Anthony, are you okay if we go a couple minutes over here?
Yeah, of course, of course. Let's try and
Great.
get through as many of the questions as possible.
Perfect. We still got like 80 people watching, so captive audience.
That's fantastic.
The next documents here we have a proof of marriage. With that, I've included proof of marriage, proof of common law status, divorce, death. It's like proof of whatever your partnership or past partnerships have been. That's pretty standard for marriage, divorce, and death. So there's a specific certificate that comes with each of those things. Common law is a little bit more subjective. Anthony, what is a common law relationship, and what do people have to submit with that?
So a common law relationship is a couple who are in a conjugal relationship living in the same residence, cohabitating for a period of 1 year or more. Okay. And after they've lived together for 1 year or more, they are considered in immigration standards as in a common law relationship. Now, obviously there is no document that there's no marriage document for that. So what you do is you download. There's a form you can download from IRCC called the Statutory Declaration of Common Law Union. And what you do is you can fill it out, but don't sign it. And then once you've filled out all the required information, you and your common law partner will go to a notary or a lawyer, and you will sign that in their presence, like a declaration. And then the lawyer will obviously stamp that and seal that. You'll take that now document is your statutory declaration of common law union. However, unlike a marriage certificate, which in an express entry you only really need to upload the marriage certificate, what we suggest, or what we would recommend, highly recommend, is yes, obviously upload your statutory declaration, but below that in the same PDF, upload some proof.
Yeah.
Upload your lease agreement showing that that the lease agreement was more than a year ago.
Yeah. Aline is asking, do you have to submit proof with your common law forms?
Yes. Upload that document. And I see a lot of people too, where when we're doing reviews and they've got the stat deck and it's perfectly done, and then we've got a lease agreement from 6 months ago and a couple of bills from last week. But that proves together, yes, that you're living together today, but your job is to prove that you've lived together for more than a year ago. Yeah. Okay, you only have to prove 1 year, but you have to prove it.
Yeah.
So that could be a joint bill dated from, where are we right now? So March, say 16th, 2020. That could be a joint utility bill, or even two separate cell phone bills with one name, same address with the same date. And we know that it was that is also proof that you're. So as much as possible, and again, the thing about express entry, and we can get to that, when I finish off with this, is you have to get a bit clever when it comes to PDF shrinking, because you're only permitted to upload a 4 megabyte file, PDF file. or whatever other files they accept. So again, you have to get kind of, what's the word, tech savvy and being able to shrink down PDFs. What I would advise though, anyone doing that is, when you shrink a PDF, please go look at the quality before you upload. Don't assume that it's the same quality of when you shrunk it down. It can degrade and sometimes become illegible. So
Yeah.
keep an eye on that one.
We've got a whole article on moving to Canada about file size and format for these electronic applications, and it will give you guys some free softwares or some paid softwares that will allow you to combine and shrink PDFs. Because weirdly, you're gonna have to learn how to do that to submit this application. And if you like, prepare, because if you're not prepared for this, it's gonna take you like a day or more to figure out how to combine all your PDFs and get them the
Oh
right
yeah,
size.
definitely. And
Like,
can I add one last thing to that? Again, we've gone through documents of common errors for cancellation and refusal, but another reason for the majority, a lot of cancellations, is just a common error, a file error, where someone has, it asks for passport, and they looked at their PDF on their desktop, oh, passport, and they uploaded it, but they didn't check, maybe the file was named incorrectly and that wasn't their passport that they uploaded,
yeah.
right? And that happens so often. What I always advise is, when anyone's submitting a PR application, obviously keep a separate file on your computer, a folder. So if it says basically, passport John Smith, your file, your PDF should say passport John Smith, and open it to make sure it's your passport.
Yeah.
And then all the way down, proof of medical John Smith, and then your file's called proof of medical John Smith. And then another thing to stop file mismanagement is count the amount of upload options, and then count the amount that you have. You should have an identical amount of upload options in your folder that is on your document checklist. And these are just little things you can do because it only takes a second to make a little mistake that costs you a cancellation.
And it would be a thing where you combine your police. You have a police certificate from the UK and a police certificate from Ireland. You combine them, and then you don't realize, but you actually just upload your file called police certificate UK, and you thought you did it right, but you uploaded the wrong one, and you have left out like it's those little things will really get you, and they have no patience for it, which is
No mercy.
like no
No
mercy.
mercy.
You're missing it. They're not going to give you a chance to replace it, and it's high stakes for this
That's
round.
cruel.
If you have a CRS score below what the normal threshold is, we don't know if they're going to do another CEC draw with a CRS score this low. So if you're like below like 420, you got to make sure that you get this one right. And again,
That's correct.
best way to do that, honestly, I'm super pro like doing this stuff yourself. Like empower yourself, learn about it. You can do almost all of it by yourself. You can do all of it by yourself. But this is one of those situations. Get a consultant to review your PR application before you submit it.
Even though, as well, though, as I said, even though we do a review, I always say at the end of the review, I can't control what people are uploading.
Yeah.
And again, you don't need to be in it. We all know how to use a computer, and we all know how not to use a computer. We all make mistakes, and we get frustrated.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could be amazing at this, and it's just a simple admin error. So just triple, double, quadruple check everything.
Yeah. Great. So let's rattle through a few more of these documents here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but if you have children, you got to submit proof of your like. I was going to say ownership of them. Really you have to submit your birth certificate or adoption certificates, like show that they are
Proof
your
of
children.
ownership certificate.
There's a form here that I identified there. If only one parent is moving, there's a specific form you have to submit. Proof of relatives in Canada. If you're claiming points for a relative, for a sibling, you have to provide proof that they're related to you. Anthony, we talked yesterday. The system asks you if you have a number of different types of relatives in Canada beyond sibling, but for CEC, is it really necessary to reference anyone who's not a sibling?
No, for CEC, if there is no, even if you put it in already and you're claiming an aunt or a cousin or an uncle, or there is no that lives in Canada who's a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, there's no need to include them. You can just change that, and it will take away the upload options, because that is only really eligibility criteria under the federal skilled worker, which has nothing to do with the CEC. However, you're 100% correct. A brother or sister contributes CRS points.
Yeah.
So yes, that's what you can definitely use them to, if you need the points, to help you to boost them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Then a couple forms, use of representative. So if you're working, if a consultant or a lawyer is fully representing you, there's a form you have to submit on their behalf. There's a form that you can submit if you want someone else to have access to the information. Job offer letters. We don't have time to get into job offer letters extensively today, but if you're claiming points for a job offer, please be aware that only very specific types of job offers are considered valid under Express Entry. We've got a guide to that on our website under the Express Entry heading, so you can read up on that. But it's in most cases, people aren't claiming points for a job offer, or it won't be necessary because the CRS score requirement was so low this time around. As well, we included the provincial territorial certificate of qualification here. That's only a requirement for the federal skilled trades program, but I just wanted to, be thorough with our work.
If you're claiming, or if you're claiming the 50 points on the skills transferability factor.
Right. Which I feel like that's not particularly common.
No, I don't. No, some people, because there's not been a trades draw since what?
Almost a year ago, I think.
A year ago. So there probably is a lot of people in, like, a lot of FST eligible applicants who were invited under the CEC, who were using the certificate of qualification to boost up the skills transferability. So again, make sure you need it, and
Great. Last two documents here we'll spend a little bit more time with. You mentioned one of these, Anthony, the certified translation of documents into English or French. I'll give a quick overview of this, and then I'll ask you to give a little bit more in-depth coverage here. But any document that you submit, any document, it doesn't matter what part of the application it's for, if it is not in English or French, it has to be accompanied by a translation into English or French. If you don't include the translation, you will be refused. Now, only certain things, like, you can't just have your friend do a translation for you. It has to be a specific type of translation. So, Anthony, what counts as a certified translation for immigration?
So any Canadian certified translator who's been certified by their provincial, there's, like, every province has a regulatory certified body. So if you're doing your translations, make sure that they are certified in the province where you're getting your translations done. If it's a non-certified translator, Canadian certified translator, they must include a affidavit, basically attesting to the fact that they are fluent in both languages and that they're qualified and experienced to translate the said document from whatever language to English or French.
Great.
And then obviously listing the documents that they've said and done in their affidavit, and they would sign that in the presence. They would do it. It's not in the presence for a notary or a lawyer.
Amazing.
So that's the two different types.
Great. I think that's should be most of what you guys need out there. We're going to keep things moving just so we can get through it all. The last document that we had on the list, and we've talked about this a little bit already, is the letter of explanation. So the letter of explanation, how does it, like, fit in the system? My understanding is you can, like, include a letter of explanation with, like, any other bundle of documents. So you could, like, upload one within your education documents. But is there also, like, a place where you can just upload a letter of explanation on its own?
Yes, there is. And for everyone who's loving using the website, by the way, we haven't even got into that, like all of the little nuances of the IRCC website. Whenever you get to the document upload stage, sometimes you will notice the section at the bottom saying client information. Half the time it won't be there. So what you need to keep doing if you're is you just keep refreshing, and eventually, one time out of 5 or one time out of 6, it'll pop up client information. And it's just another upload option, and that's where you would typically enter your letter of explanation and other supporting documents too. If there was something else that you needed to explain and there was nowhere else to put the supporting documents, that's where it would go also.
Yeah. That's great. It's funny that they're so strict with what you're allowed to submit, and yet the system that you're working within is like, it's not very flexible, and sometimes not particularly
Just keep
functional.
hitting the refresh button. It'll appear eventually.
Great. So those are most of the document requirements that you guys will have to concern yourself with. Apologies if we had to skim through some of those faster than you would have liked. Again, the completeness check URL from the IRCC operations guidelines that I linked before is a really good comprehensive guide. Or, if you're not sure about something, as I will continue to reiterate, book a consultation with Anthony and he'd be happy to help you. We've got a slide here on what to do if you can't get a document. We do think this is important just to go over briefly. And we've outlined here, this paragraph is really important. Failure to submit any document required by IRCC may result in rejection of your application. Alternative documents may be submitted, but final decisions always rest at the discretion of the immigration officers. Okay? We obviously can't go into details about what the different alternative documentation options for each different category are. We did give some like little examples for like work reference letters, like what you might be able to try to submit. There's some situations where, if you can't get a police certificate because it's taking too long to process it, you can submit like sort of placeholder, like showing that you have applied for it and it's just you're waiting for it to come. So there are different types of alternative documentation. Within that, you can also, as we just mentioned, include a letter of explanation. Or, of course, if you know that your application will be refused or rejected because you can't get everything and you know that you can't get everything, you can also decline your invitation to apply. And if you decline your invitation to apply, Anthony, what happens to your profile?
When you decline, the profile goes back in. Yes, you do not need to recreate a new profile. The profile just goes back into the pool.
Yeah.
Just like as I said, it's there's probably going to be few circumstances in this particular draw where someone would need to decline.
Yeah.
I can't see many, maybe one or two, granted, but yeah, before you decline, make sure you have to decline.
Yeah, but I remember seeing people, they'd have a CRS score like up around 500 and they'd realize like, oh, I can't get this document in time. Oh, well, I'll just decline this invitation and I'll wait for the next round because I'm confident I'm going to get one.
As you said earlier on, like we have no idea if we'll ever see a point score this low again.
That's exactly it. So you got to be really careful if you're going to choose that option this time around. And also, I mean, what if you did that and you're an FSW candidate? And then, again, the last 3 months, there hasn't been an FSW draw. So you'll see here, I also say if you can't get a required document and you're not sure what to do, the best thing you can do is book a consultation with a regulated immigration consultant. Again, it's high stakes applications here, everybody. Most common mistakes. Let's rattle through this. We have addressed each of these as we got through them in the document requirements. So we'll give a quick summary here. From your perspective, Anthony, these are your most common mistakes. Well, not yours specifically, but the ones that you see. Education documents. What's the mistake that happens with the education documents?
People not uploading the degree, the credential, the education credential, whether that was the degree, diploma, or certificate.
Great. We have police certificates. Common mistakes with police certificates.
Not uploading in color, and then majority of the time uploading police certificates that are no longer valid.
Yeah, and that would be the situation where you had gotten it, before you left the country from the last time that you were residing there for 6 consecutive months, most commonly. But there are other reasons. Work reference letters. What are the common reasons you see work reference letters being refused?
If any of the things that we mentioned earlier on, and I'll go through them very, very quickly. I'm not going to. Occupation, so your name, your occupation/title, your duration of employment, your hours per week, your salary or hourly pay, the primary duties and responsibilities, signed by HR supervisor manager stating their name and title on company letterhead with contact details. Potentially, if any of those elements are missing from a letter of employment, it could be refused.
Yeah. And NOC codes are a common, like one of the common things there as well. People will assume that I say that I'm a software engineer. My letter says I'm a software engineer. They'll accept that. Nope. You got to make sure that the duties and responsibilities match those in the NOC database for a software engineer. And then the last thing that we had under common mistakes here is, do you meet the requirements at the time you're submitting the application? So this is quite important. We've sort of hinted at this throughout. You have to meet the program requirements at the time that you are like click submit on your PR application. Just because you met the requirements when you received your invitation, it doesn't mean that you still meet them. There's a 90-day, there can be up to 90 days between those two things. So, for example, let's say you need 1 year of Canadian work experience within the past 3 years for Canadian experience class. Let's say you gained that experience almost 3 years ago, and you only had 1 year, and now you're back in, South Africa. If it starts eating away at that 1 year of experience before you submit your invitation to, or before you submit your PR application, then you're going to be refused because you no longer meet that requirement, even if you did when you received the
That's a really
invitation.
good one. That's a really good one. Yeah, 2 years and 1 day. That would be enough to make you not eligible anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And people sometimes don't. I mean, they don't realize that you have to meet it when you submit. People don't know when the lock-in date is, but it's when you submit the application itself. Great. So that's that's our common mistakes. We've got a list here of some special measures for COVID. One disclaimer that I always say when dealing with COVID stuff is, COVID regulations change all the time. They're constantly changing. So we're not going to go into detail about this stuff right now, simply because it might not be true 2 months from now. But a couple of the big takeaways throughout COVID, PR applicants have been given 90 days to complete their application rather than the 60 days they used to be given. IRCC has stated that they won't refuse applications if documents can't be obtained due to COVID, but as we've mentioned before, that's not like a catch-all, so you just can't submit things. If you were not able to obtain a document due to COVID, you have to provide supporting evidence, and it's mainly used in the case of medical exams, police certificates, and biometrics. And then there are a few other things here: biometrics exemptions, PRs, activations, processing delays, and travel restrictions. What I'm going to do is pop a link into the comment section here, just so you guys can review that on your own. We've got a COVID news feed on the Moving to Canada website. We update it anytime there's an update. So for all of the latest details about all of those things, PR activation, biometrics, travel restrictions, always refer to our COVID news feed because that's where you'll get the most up-to-date information. Great. So I just handled the full COVID section by myself, Anthony. I hope that's okay.
Pretty good.
But we're going to end off the live stream today just by giving you, Anthony, a chance to talk about your services and the benefits of working with a consultant. I hope that everybody who's been watching understands the benefit of working with someone with your level of expertise, and realizes, even just a tiny little mistake can be cause for something to be refused. But Anthony, you guys offer a consultation. You offer a PR application review. Can you talk a little bit about those services and about why it might make sense to work with a consultant at this stage in the process?
Yeah, so basically, as we've seen throughout this video, people have certain problems that they can't address. For instance, not being able to prove previous work experience, or their passport is expiring. There's always issues, and sometimes multiple issues. And if you are, again, what you said, anyone can do their own application. Just read the guide, read it again, and then make sure everything's done properly. However, it can be helpful in that when you're doing it by yourself, to have that consultation, to write down all of the little concerns. I can't remember this address. What should I do? I can't remember this travel history. All of those little nuances or little things in Express Entry that that are hard to figure out. So that's the primary purpose of a consultation, is to ask any of those questions.
Great.
Express Entry review is what we decided to do is, we understand and we agree that there's so many people doing their own applications, and why shouldn't they? The information's there, and rather than pay a consultant $2,000 or $3,000 to take full responsibility of that application, is there a halfway point? So we decided to do Express Entry and family sponsorship application reviews, and it allows the person to pay a fraction of the fees that would cost for representation. However, you get a professional pair of eyes to go through your application to, one, make sure that you're eligible and you've demonstrated so, make sure that you have the necessary CRS points, and again, you've demonstrated so. And then with the supporting documents, we go through all of the supporting documents to make sure that each document meets the minimum criteria as required by IRCC.
Great.
So it's a great halfway meeting point where, if you're not sure, shall I get a representative? Can I do it myself? Do it yourself and get an application review.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
And
it's really good bang for your buck. The application reviews, it kind of gives you the most peace of mind that you can get without working with a consultant for like full representation on the whole process.
yeah, again, I would like to congratulate all the 27,000 people that got the ITAs. For the unfortunate ones that didn't get the ones, and we hope that we don't know what's going to happen, but we hope that the same happens to you also.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on all the latest Express Entry results. There was actually a draw about an hour before we went live today. You can always find the latest results on the Moving to Canada website. But I do just want to end off with another plug for Anthony's services. As you were speaking, Anthony, I pulled up the Express Entry application review on the Doherty Fultz website and just scrolled through that so people can see sort of what they are paying for in that situation. But as you guys have witnessed today, Anthony really knows his stuff, and even just a single tiny little mistake can be grounds for refusal in this situation. It's quite high stakes. So as much as we're at Moving to Canada, we're all for like empowerment and independence in doing your own immigration process. This is the situation where like it might make sense to work with a consultant.
What I would add, Dane, sorry, just one last thing, is if any one of you two, and I'm assuming there's a couple out of the 27,000, if you've got an extremely difficult case or that you've got previous criminality, or there's something that is just not very ordinary and very complicated about it, minimum book a consultation with a professional, and there you may need representation depending on how complicated your your application is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we talked about that medical case before. Like anything dealing with criminal or medical inadmissibility, it can get really complex really quickly. And sometimes you're gonna need a representative if you want a shot at being successful. Great. And of course, if you're tuned in now, you can book a consultation or review with Anthony just by clicking the link right there in the pinned comment. So, look, guys, we've been going for almost 2 hours now. Wild. This is our longest live stream to date. So good. You have a record with us now, Anthony.
Good.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Anthony, for sharing your time with us today and your expertise. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Again, happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. I hope you have a sensible, responsible day.
Exactly. Next year will be the year of debauchery. And we will, of course, go live next time we've got more immigration news and updates or skills and experiences to share with you guys. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.